Puffin's Pudding by Christine E. Bradley. Puffin the pixie was just about to put the pudding on to boil for dinner when he found that there was a hole in the saucepan.
"Oh dear, what a bother!"
cried Puffin.
"You can't cook a pudding in a saucepan with a hole in it. Whatever shall I do?"
It was such a lovely pudding too. Puffin had put the last of his currants into it and plenty of sugar and spice. And he had eaten as little breakfast as possible so as to be sure of a good appetite for dinner.
"I shall have to go shopping," said Puffin, "and see if I can buy a new saucepan, but I'm afraid they cost a dreadful lot of money."
When he looked in the housekeeping purse, he found that there was only 6pence left.
"That's got to last till Saturday,"
said Puffin.
"Dear, oh dear, I am in a fix. Well, anyway, I'll go and have a look round the shops. Perhaps I might find a second-hand saucepan somewhere for 6pence.
Just then, looking out of the window, he saw Buffin going by with his nose in the air.
"There's that Buffin,"
said Puffin.
"I guess he's got a saucepan. If only we hadn't fallen out, I might have been able to borrow it to boil my pudding in. Oh dear, how unlucky I am."
Puffin and Buffin had been the greatest of friends until they took allotments side by side. Then trouble started. Buffin said Puffin's beans kept the sun off his tomatoes, and Puffin was annoyed because Buffin grew the biggest vegetable marrow and won a prize at the show. Since then, they hadn't been on speaking terms. So Puffin went off up the street to look for a saucepan, and Buffin went on down the street to the little shop at the corner to buy his morning paper. And soon he was coming back, walking along with his nose buried in it, as was his usual way.
"I'd better call in to tell Bluff the news,"
he said to himself. And still scarcely raising his head, he turned in at a gate and walked up the garden path and opened the door without knocking and went in, just as he always did when he went to call on his friend Bluff.
"Hello, Bluff!"
called Buffin. There was no answer. Nobody about at all. Only on the table a large pudding in a cloth, and beside it a very old saucepan with a hole in it.
"Oh, what a lovely pudding!"
cried Buffin.
"But just look at the saucepan." "Poor Bluff, he can't boil a pudding in an old saucepan like that."
Then Buffin thought of something.
"I know what I'll do," he said to himself. "I'll take it home and cook it in my saucepan, and then I'll bring it back at dinner time. Won't that be a nice surprise for Bluff?"
So Buffin picked up the pudding and hurried off home, and in a very short time he had it boiling and bubbling away in his big saucepan. And on the stroke of 1 o'clock, there he was back at Bluff's house, bearing the big steaming pudding. Bluff was laying the table for dinner, a little sadly, because there wasn't very much for dinner today. There wasn't a second course at all.
"Here you are, Bluff," cried Buffin. "Here's your pudding, piping hot and done to a turn."
Bluff's eyes grew round when he saw the pudding.
"Whatever do you mean, Buffin?" he cried. "That isn't my pudding." "Of course it is," said Buffin. "It must be. I found it here on your table, waiting to be boiled, and I saw your saucepan had a hole in it, so I took the pudding home and boiled it in my saucepan." "There's a mistake somewhere, Buffin," said Bluff. "That isn't my pudding. I only wish it was,"
Bluff added wistfully. At that minute, Puffin burst in. "Bluff!" he cried. "Somebody's stolen my pudding!" Puffin had had a very trying morning. Though he searched all over town, he hadn't been able to find a saucepan anywhere for 6pence, not even a second-hand one. And now he was very tired and hot, and hungry. And when he saw his own beautiful pudding on the table, his face grew red with rage, and pointing at Buffin, he cried, "You stole my pudding! I know you did! I saw you going past my house, and when I had gone out, you went in and stole it!" Buffin, of course, saw now just what had happened, and his face too grew red, and he gulped once or twice, and then he said,
"I really am very sorry, Puffin. It's all due to my bad habit of walking along with my nose in the newspaper. I thought it was Bluff's house I'd come into, and Bluff's pudding on the table, and I took it home to boil it for him, because his saucepan had a hole in it. But I see now," said Buffin, "it must have been your house, Puffin, and your pudding, and I really am sorry about it."
Puffin didn't know quite what to say. He wasn't really sure if he believed Puffin or not, but it was rather difficult to remain angry in the face of such a handsome apology.
"Anyway,"
put in Bluff,
"the pudding's here, Puffin. Nobody's eaten it. Hadn't you better take it home and have it while it's hot?"
Puffin looked at the pudding on the table, all swelled out, big and round in its cloth like a football, and he said,
"But I couldn't possibly eat it all. There's plenty for 3. Can't we all sit down here and have it together?" "Of course we can, Puffin,"
cried Bluff, his face beaming as he ran to the cupboard to get out extra plates and things. And soon the 3 of them were gathered round the table, tucking into Puffin's pudding and saying it was the best pudding they had ever eaten. And Bluff was delighted to see that Puffin and Buffin were soon chattering away like the old friends they used to be. When they had eaten all the pudding and washed all the dishes and had a little rest, Puffin and Buffin left the house together, arm in arm.
"If you like, Buffin," said Puffin, "I don't mind having my beans in another place next time, so that they don't keep the sun off your tomatoes. They didn't do very well there anyway." "Thank you, Puffin," said Buffin. "And you know, Puffin, I could not help my vegetable marrows growing bigger than yours. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you some of my special seeds, and then your marrows will be sure to grow as big as mine." "Thank you very much, Buffin,"
said Puffin, and they shook hands and were the best of pals ever after.